Hey, good morning, Matt.
Good morning, America.
Well, that's right. I guess it's good afternoon where you are in Italy these days,
Yes, that's right. That's right.
but it is morning here, relatively early, 10 a.m., coming at you with a special early morning edition of our crate digging series. We had fun doing this last time. Again, this was kind of throwing it back to the old days where, jazz fans would get together at the record store, dig through the crates of records and kind of, find albums to recommend to each other. That's
Yeah.
that's what we're getting back to. I've had enough with the algorithms, the streaming players telling me what I should listen to. So I thought, who better to call up than my friend Matt McCucci, online editor of Jazz's Magazine. I'm Brian Zimmerman, by the way, executive editor of Jazz's Magazine. And yeah, it is a special week for crate digging. At least here in the United States, Matt. We are in what has turned out to be election week. We voted on Tuesday for the next president of the United States, and here it is Thursday, still waiting on results in some nail-biter state scenarios. So Matt and I thought, maybe we could, of course, turn to jazz to settle our turbulent minds and talk about some albums, recent albums, not so recent albums that speak to just the political theater and themes of politics, or even more so, elections. So that's what we're going to be getting into today. As always, we encourage everyone watching, if you would like to participate, tell us about an album, you may be listening to at least get you through this tense election cycle. Let us know in the comments. We'd be happy to read it on air. Another big announcement, Matt, is that, as you know, a lot of people are watching this right now on Facebook and YouTube. Starting Monday, right? We will be moving exclusively to YouTube for the live version of these videos. Okay, so these will be taking place exclusively on YouTube. Of course, we will repost the video later on Facebook, but if you want to get involved, if you want to share some albums with, if you want to ask questions to our guest, the place to do that is going to be on our YouTube channel, the Jazz Is YouTube channel. But with that, Matt, I mean, you've probably been keeping an eye on from afar of what's been going on here.
Oh yeah,
down to the wire when it comes to this election. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, it's amazing.
Past
the drama, the drama is incredible. It's intense. As an outsider looking in, obviously outsider to a certain extent. Let's face it. Yes. But we're all connected in some way. But yeah, and definitely it's getting intense. But what you were saying about the crate digging tradition, it's really starting to feel like the older days, because different parts of the world, including here in Italy where I am right now, record stores will actually be closing again, if not, they're not already closed in parts of the country. So the physical act of actually going through the different albums and just seeing what you can discover, I mean, that's just one of the things that we may be missing out on during lockdown. So let's at least try to replicate some of that feeling with this new good kind of
this feels series. Healthy. Yes. And we've already got some people saying hello. Smooth Jazz family, good morning to you too. Marilyn, hello from San Diego. Hello to you. And Jennifer is letting us know Kamasi, Washington's Heaven and Earth is helping her get through the stress of this prolonged election cycle. So thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, great recommendation. All right, Matt, we are going to, I guess, start with your first album. And so I pulled it up. We could show the album cover there. I hope that was your first album. If not, we may be jumping the gun.
That's okay. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're starting with a big one here, because the reason why I picked this song, I actually highlighted one of the songs from this album for the daily sort of Song of the Day feature. And I'll talk about that a little later. But of course, Jill Scott Heron was a true poet, as well as an acclaimed singer-songwriter, and alongside his musical partner Brian Jackson, he really crafted a hard-hitting blend of soul, jazz, and funk that actually ended up being hugely influential for the birth of hip-hop. And he did it already with a studio debut from 1971 titled Pieces of a Man. And but I feel what really makes the album timeless, aside from music, is the words themselves. Whether sung or recited in spoken word performances, they really reflect uncomfortable truths about society, politics, and even mental health or substance abuse. All of these really really real things, I would say, and that remain relevant to this day. Now, he would continue to release powerful music in the years to come, but the reason why I chose this album is, as I hinted at earlier, is because I've been listening to, the opening song of this album. The ultimate, not the first, mind you, recording of "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," which really spoke about the lack of media coverage for Black communities. And it's remains one of the most iconic revolutionary songs of all time, I think. But overall, the album itself, I pulled out a quote about just to back up what I'm about to say, because it really reflects what I feel Scott Heron saw as the role of being a poet. He really saw it as I actually didn't pull out the quote, I can't find it, but he saw it as being a spokesperson for the community that he or she is a part of. So really representing that community through words, through poetry.
Very cool. All right. Good way to lead us off. It's a good foot to start on. Now, Matt, I took this crate digging challenge a little more literally than you. Everyone knows who watches this podcast knows you are the poetic one. You are the romantic. I'm the rube who takes everything literally. So I was looking for albums that had to deal specifically with elections, and we saw a slate of those released this election cycle and the last one in 2016. So I am going to start my crate digging with this album here from saxophonist Ted Nash. Ted Nash was a part of the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. He released this album in September of 2016. It is called, with a big band, it's called the Presidential Suite, 8 Meditations on Freedom. This was a really cool album because what Ted did was he analyzed, 8 Variations on Freedom. What he did was he analyzed speeches by famous American and international leaders, many presidents among them, analyzed those speeches for unique musical patterns, cadences, rhythms in the speech itself, and then translated those cadences and those patterns into big band compositions. And so the album unfolds just like that. It actually features the speech itself read by, it's got a lot of really nice cameos on here: Douglas Brinkley, Glenn Close, Deepak Chopra, Joe Lieberman, Dave Miliband, Sam Waterston, a bunch of others, and alternates the reading of the speech with the big band interpretation of that speech. And of course, in Ted's hands, those speeches just become these wonderful orchestral, musical statements. It features, as you would expect, a lot of players from the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. So Wynton Marsalis is on trumpet, Ryan Kaiser is on trumpet, Victor Goines on reeds, Sherman Irby on reeds. A lot of familiar faces if you're a fan of the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. But this was a really important album when it was released in September, again, just before the election. And it was played on the radio in a lot of cases. A lot of public radio stations held special, commissioned airings of this piece, and it would go on to win the Grammy for Best Jazz Large Ensemble Jazz Album in 2017. And Spoken at Midnight won the Grammy for Best Instrumental Composition. And Spoken at Midnight, I believe, was an interpretation of a Franklin D. Roosevelt speech. So yeah, we're talking elections, we're talking presidents, we're talking to leaders. This was the first album to come to mind. So this is the first album I dug from the crate. Ted Nash, Big Band, Presidential Suite.
Wow, I'd never heard of that. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Got to check that
2016. Highly recommended.
Wow.
All right, man. So let's move on to your next album on the list. You tell me what it is and I'll pull it right up, man.
Oh, well, why don't we go with Dave Brubeck?
There you go.
So we are fast approaching the 100th anniversary of the great Dave Brubeck. So I figured that it would just, be appropriate to kind of choose an album of his. Actually, this is interesting because I would define this as a jazz operetta in a way, the libretto of which was written by Dave and Iola Brubeck, and was inspired by the Jazz Ambassadors program. I gotta be careful with this album because I've been familiar with it for quite a while, and I'm just fascinated with the entire thing. Anyways, so I might get carried away. I'll try to keep it brief and short and sweet. So yes, it was inspired by the Jazz Ambassadors program, which I'm sure most jazz fans are familiar with. It was essentially a program that ran from the late 50s to the early 60s, through which the United States sought to improve its image abroad. So particularly in light of criticism for its racial inequality, by promoting concerts in different countries of jazz greats of the time. Louis Armstrong was the jazz ambassador, and so there's pictures of him going to these different places all over the world, performing as a jazz ambassador. And essentially he is the protagonist, or a version of him is a protagonist of this operetta. I'm calling it The Real Ambassadors, and he plays the lead role in it. So we do hear him singing and playing his trumpet alongside just a star-studded lineup. So many names involved in this production. The sad news is, though, that we do have a version of this album. It was recorded in the studio in 1961, and but really, I feel like a live performance, the premiere live performance that took place at the Monterey Jazz Festival a year later in 1962, would have been the ideal version of this album, the one that we should have actually had, because its energy probably would have been much more powerful. We don't have it. Unfortunately, Brubeck didn't have the $750 or so, or 780, I can't remember exactly the sum that was required for the album to have been recorded. So, and that's a sad fact in itself. I mean, he didn't have $780 to record his album with. It's almost hard to believe. This is Dave Brubeck. But anyways, bottom line is we don't have the historical recording of this particular performance. Nobody else seems to have recognized its performance at the time. However, like I said, we do have a version of this album, and if you do decide to listen to it, I would suggest actually listening to it like an album is supposed to sort of be heard from start to finish, because there is a narrative that's quite gripping, and it's witty, but also, like I said, powerful. It speaks a lot of truth, and there's some really interesting moments within it that sort of paint a picture of what was happening in America at the time.
Yes, and yet a great listen for this very moment as well. So good pick for the second album from the crate, Matt. I must make a correction before we move on. The song Spoken at Midnight that won the Grammy from the Ted Nash album was an interpretation of a speech by Jawaharlal Nehru, first Prime Minister of India, not Franklin D. Roosevelt. My eyes were crossed. I couldn't get it right, but important correction to the record. A great song and a great album. The next one on my list is going to be, here, let's see if we can pull it up. All right, trying to get both sides. We're going to stay. There's a common theme here for me. There's a 6 degrees of Wynton Marsalis here. But this one was an album that came out in, I believe, 2018 by Delphio Marsalis, the trombone playing brother of Wynton Marsalis, called, Make America Great Again. Controversial title for this album. A really great album. And in interviews, Delphio had explained that, a lot of the songs for this album were composed or were kind of cobbled together through road performances. And as the band would perform this repertoire, they would decide which songs to include on the album. And as they were finalizing the repertoire, they had asked a live audience, what do you think we should call this album? And this was in the early stage of kind of the 2016 race, and somebody shouted out, Make America Great Again. Delphio Marsalis and the Uptown Jazz Orchestra ran with this title. And, in subsequent interviews, people would ask, that's a controversial title? May it be off-putting to some people? And very much to Delphio's credit, he said, look, people have to learn to see beyond the headline, beyond the title, beyond the cover, and really delve into the substance of the thing, just like you have to do with the people. So he stuck with the title. And again, I mean, the album covers a wide range of thematic topics. It features narration by Wendell Pierce, actor Wendell Pierce, who's, again, the title track, Make America Great Again, is this ode to, diversity and overcoming oppression, and really not what you would expect from the title of the album, Make America Great Again, necessarily. Not to mention, it is just absolutely swinging jazz, in the kind of traditional New Orleans style, which Delfeayo just executes so well. So yeah, I thought this was an important album. Again, even now, for kind of seeing beyond title headline thinking, learning to proceed beyond, beneath, first impression, initial thought, because I think whatever the outcome of this election, we're going to have to learn to do that, as a country here. So that's why I selected this album. I think it's just an important lesson for us to all kind of, take to heart as we move forward, again, with whatever happens with this election. So that was number 2 on my list, Delfeayo Marsalis and the Uptown Jazz Orchestra, Make America Great Again.
You mentioned Wendell Pierce there, and I just newsflash, if anyone hasn't heard, he will be actually interpreting B.B. King in an upcoming biopic. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
That's very cool. Yeah, Wendell and the Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra, and the Marsalises in particular, collaborate frequently. And Wendell actually just lent, again, his narration skills to an album by Wynton Marsalis and the Jazz and Lincoln Orchestra called The Ever Funky Lowdown, which is kind of this musical, kind of operatic thing where there's this character of a con man who, anyway, you could, take that however you wish allegorically, but another great collaboration between Wendell Pierce and Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra and Wynton Marsalis. So want to throw that out there as a bonus album. But all right, Matt, where are we going for you? Which album am I digging from the crate, the digital crate?
Well, let's get to more contemporary times. Actually, very contemporary times. This album that I will be talking about is from 2 years ago. Yeah, 2018. I can still do a little bit of math. It's by Marc Ribot, and it's Songs of Resistance, 1942 to 2018. That's great. I almost forgot the title of the album. Now it's funny because I have been listening to this album a lot, actually, in preparation of the U.S. elections, because I hadn't. I remember listening to it when it came out, but then I hadn't listened to it for a while. This album essentially is, I see it as a response to and a reflection on the first 2 years of the Trump administration, as well as a response to the sort of hostilities that it generated, especially among people and cultures. In fact, this is an album that really draws inspiration from traditions of different cultures. And what better way to represent the energy of multiculturality than just by through the power of music, and especially via a program that is as varied as the one that is presented in this album. So while some of the tracks are definitely closer to folk rock, some of them even seem directly inspired by people like Bob Dylan. Anyways, jazz is certainly present right from the start. The opening track is a sort of an avant jazz, I would call it, or definitely sort of jazz take on a traditional Black American hymn, "We Are Soldiers in the Army," which I think is very powerful lyrics. And but among my favorite tracks is actually a version of Paquita la del Barrio's "Rata de dos Patas," which means rat with 2 legs, and was originally written, I think, I'm not entirely sure. If anyone knows, comment in the section below. I tried to research a little bit. I think it was about a breakup, but in this version, the rat with 2 legs, you can guess who it is. but it's the most joyful song ever. And just the entire song is basically just insults, just figuring out ways to insult a person, just the most inventive ones. But it's so joyful. It's a delight. You got to listen to it. Rata de los Patos. But yeah, just bottom line, obviously that's a reference to Trump's controversial attitude towards Mexico and so on. Great album, so much fun. Each song is just very different from the next. There's some references to past songs, but also I should say that there are original compositions as well. So thumbs up.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to dig that album out again. Give it another listen. I actually saw Marc Ribot perform tracks from this album at the Montreal Jazz Festival in 2018. Prior to its release, it's super moving stuff to see live, as you could imagine. And just from a purely technical standpoint, Marc Ribot is such a creative player with his left hand in terms of his chording and his facility, his ability to articulate on the fretboard. Because, fun fact, he is left-handed. Learning to play guitar, he only had the right hand. So again, like Bill Evans, who gets so creative in his chording because he is left-handed. Ditto for Marc Ribot, gets super creative on that fretboard. The more you know. Anyway, I will go ahead and pull up my next album here. This is another recent one. You have seen it before, but again, I have stuck with the theme purely of elections, and it has been fun to kind of see how this album has played out. It is Regina Carter's Freedom Band, Swing States, Harmony in the Battleground. Okay, and this was a very cool concept album released this year. Regina Carter, violinist, decided to put together a compilation of songs having to do with these swing states, traditional swing states in American elections. States that are, up for grabs when it comes to their electoral votes and their political leanings. She has put together a fantastic band for this album. In addition to herself, she has John DeVersa on trumpet. John has been doing some amazing things out of the University of Miami with that program there, including winning some Grammys. John Batiste on keyboards, Alex Cuadrado on bass, Kabir Sagal, and Harvey Mason on drums. So, it's a little bit of an interesting mix. Harvey Mason has that strong fusion background, but the guy can really play it all. So it's a nice kind of mix of voices in the ensemble itself. And then in terms of the repertoire, again, she picks songs that are culturally and historically and traditionally associated with these swing states. So what do I mean by that? She's got the tune Pennsylvania on there for Pennsylvania. And wow, watching this election play out, Pennsylvania has certainly turned into a swing state and can still swing either way. Swanee River on there for Florida. In my personal opinion is that Florida is becoming less and less of a swing state, but Rocky Mountain High for Colorado, Dancing in the Streets for Michigan. And again, kind of hearkening back to the Motown style, the Motown days. And yeah, that one was dead on. Georgia on My Mind for Georgia. Again, so it's kind of a cool listen, especially now. And, maybe if you're so inclined, you could put it on, play one song, and hopefully, get one state to swing whichever way you want it to go. But the overall message with these swing states is that, we are united by a common music. All of us in swing, and not just in the jazz sense, but, I was talking to a record producer about this the other day. Swing as an element of music is just kind of the animus, the life force that makes it move, that makes you move, that resonates inside you. That's universal. And I think that's the ultimate message of swing states here. But a great listen, especially now, as here in America, we are waiting on results from these very swing states. So that was that one I certainly had to dig from the crate.
I always thought that swing states were just states that like Benny Goodman.
Hey, that's every state.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. All right,
man. I think I got one more for you, right?
Yes, we do. Okay, so this is a new album because I two of my albums at least were from the past, so I thought I wanted to highlight a new album that doesn't really have much to do with politics.
And hey, sometimes you need that right now. We all need the distraction. Oh, good God. I think every single one of us was probably up till, the wee hours of the morning on Tuesday. We were zombies on Wednesday. We're still zombies today. So sometimes you need the distraction.
Exactly. So, but it is sort of appropriate because it's only a few days after the Day of the Dead, El Dia de los Muertos, I believe.
That's right.
That's how you say it. I'm not sure if anyone. Please
Sounded
don't
good to
judge
me.
me for my pronunciations. What better way to celebrate it than by just talking about? We've already mentioned this album that I'm going to talk about. Actually, it's we mentioned it in our 10 albums list, where we listed 10 noteworthy albums that were released last month. It's by Tino Contreras, one of Mexico's most celebrated jazz artists, over 90 years old, still able to drum in an amazing way. La Noche de los Dioses, so Night of the Gods. So we've already we already talked about it in the previous video, but I've had a chance to listen to it. I've listened to it quite a lot over the past few days, and I just wanted to point out a couple of things about it. First of all, the tracks from this album are from his past, but in revisiting them, they definitely sound very modern. And what really strikes me is just the way he plays. His expressive drumming is just one of a kind. It's amazing. It's unique. And so what he does is each of these tracks, it feels like you are entering a world. So the theme obviously implies spirituality, but here, unlike many other releases that we talk about in these videos, we talk about in our articles, spirituality here is intended almost to be fun. It's an exploration. Sure, there is solemnity in it, but you really feel like you're sort of just visiting a world that's strange, mysterious, and it's sort of the fun. There's a siren. I don't know if you can hear. It's sort of a fun world that you're visiting and inhabiting, and it's really wonderful to kind of get to do that through the power of this music. And of course, it puts an adventurous twist to the track, but I also, it's fun to see the connection between this album and I feel like this is the kind of jazz album that would appeal to also rock fans, because although it's not outright rock, you can definitely hear how a guy like Tino Contreras definitely influenced many rock musicians as well throughout his career, and he's still going strong. So definitely wanted to point out that this is one of the newer releases that you should definitely check out.
Very cool. Nice pick. And yeah, like I say, it's always good to, if you need to, again, just take your mind off all the election stuff, put on something that has nothing to do with it. But funny, my final pick too has crossover appeal to pop and rock and certainly country, bluegrass, folk, Americana fans as well. It is an album that came out in 2018, and we'll pull it up here. And again, you may have seen it on our site, jazzes.com, certainly before, but it is, again, I'm going back to the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra. It's the album United We Swing. It's the Wynton Marsalis Septet. This was a benefit album put out in support of the Jazz at Lincoln Center educational programs. So it was a really wonderful album. What was so cool about this album was that it featured so many non-jazz guests. So just some backstory. It was recorded between 2003 and 2007. So it reaches pretty far back. This stuff had been in the can for a while. Between 2003 and 2007 was released in 2018. And the idea was to kind of put America's voices together. So iconic singers from all over the map. And to that effect, I mean, check out this roster of guest stars here. It kicks off with a tune featuring the Blind Boys of Alabama. Immediately follows that up with a tune featuring Bob Dylan. It Takes a Lot to Laugh. It Takes a Train to Cry. And super importantly, Ray Charles is featured on this disc. Ray passed away in 2004. But again, this material spans back to 2003. So what a treat to hear Ray Charles with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. But a whole bevy of names here. Eric Clapton is on this disc, Audra McDonald, Willie Nelson, John Mayer, Lyle Lovett, who I've been listening to a lot lately, the Cowboy Poet, or the Poet Cowboy, whatever they call him, James Taylor, Lenny Kravitz, Jimmy Buffett, another favorite of mine. And, I will proudly admit that. Susan Tedeschi and Derek Trucks are on this album. It's a wonderful program. You get that live feel from being at the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra. So again, Matt, you mentioned early on, we're here in lockdowns and, we're all kind of craving live music, live interaction of any sort. This album very much has that feel. So yeah, this is my fourth and final choice. Again, a not so oldie, came out in 2018, but featuring that material from Jazz and Lincoln Center spanning all the way back to 2003. And again, just such an important sentiment. United we swing. It's an important thing to keep in mind during this election cycle. And yeah, again, crossover. This is a good one to share with your friends who may, want to get into jazz, coming from the worlds of rock and pop and blues and all that kind of stuff. So I had to dust that one off from the crate, but I believe that does it for us, Matt. That was all the albums dug from the crate, huh?
Wow, that was so much fun.
That was a good one.
It puts a fun spin on politics.
Totally, and that was the yes. And anything we can do to put a fun spin on politics now is much needed. But thank you everyone for watching. And again, like we said, we're going to continue with these thematic crate digging sessions. So we encourage all of you watching, dig through the crates yourself. Let us know what albums you've been listening to. Another reminder, though, starting next week, we will be. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. I'm glad you liked the choice, and thank you for watching. Remind Jennifer and everybody watching that starting next week, again, the live portion, if you want to comment, if you want to like, if you want to ask questions, that's going to be exclusively on the Jazz's YouTube page. So that's where we're doing all the live stuff. We will, of course, repost the videos on our Facebook page, but so you can absolutely watch them there. However, you won't be able to interact with us. And that's something we love about these shows. So follow us on over to the Jazz's YouTube page. Follow us, click subscribe so that you know when we're going live. Sign up for our newsletter on jazzes.com. That's where we blast out, a lot of the videos you may have missed. That's where you can sign up to, watch our or you can read our digital issues, one of which just came out, featuring Russell Ferrante of the Yellow Jackets. A lot of cool stuff happening on jazzes.com. But yeah, that'll do it for today's crate digging. Matt, thanks for joining me, man.
It's been a pleasure. All
right, Matt, have a great afternoon, and we'll head back into this election week. Here we go. So long, everybody.